everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist and composer Jorge Roeder. Yay! Jorge, we're so excited to get a chance to chat. You have a new release, debut album, El Suelo Mío, that we've been listening to. We're definitely going to want to talk about that, but as always, we want to get to know you. How did you get started in music and on bass?
Well, thank you for having me, Raul. I'm originally from Lima, Peru, and I grew up into a non-musical family. When I was 8 years old, my mom put me in guitar lessons, and I was mildly interested at the time. But a seed was planted, I guess. And by the time I was 14, I was interested in listening to radio, listening to alternative rock. 90s rock at the time was getting me. And I started to listen to the bass. I started singling out the bass lines. I think I had this over the course of my childhood that I would single out different parts of the music. And once I got on the bass, I couldn't get out. It was like I wanted to figure out the bass lines for everything. I joined a rock band in high school, and I started playing cello at the same time as I started playing electric bass at age 14. And so I had these two channels that were going parallel to each other. Very different music was being created on each. Starting to learn classical, Bach suites, orchestral music. And on the other side, I was starting to get into hard rock, Metallica, and Nirvana, Pearl Jam, all these bands at the time. When I was in my last year in high school, I had always had an interest in the upright bass. I would see the bass players playing in the orchestra behind the cellos, and we would be playing the same line, but the way they played it sounded better. The lower line sounded better to me. I was like, I want to play that line. So on the breaks, I would go to them and ask the teacher, hey, can I try that line on the bass? And he's like, you have bass player's hands, And I'm like, really? Okay, you should try playing bass. And that last year in high school, I switched finally.
Mm-hmm.
He lured me in, and I was like, let's do it. So I started becoming very serious with the upright, and little by little leaving the electric and the cello, to the point that I just became kind of full-on upright player. And then at around the same time that I was already out of high school and started to play classical bass, I discovered a student big band. I was able to get in and start learning jazz little by little. And once that seed was planted, I decided that's my path. Jazz on upright bass.
Gotcha. Well, and you had further training. You went to a conservatory as well, so you kind of followed the whole gamma of the classical end.
That's right. I did go when I was studying cello. I had the chance of going to Russia to study for a few months. But that was definitely a changing experience. To see the level, I was one of many students this studio teacher had, and one of them was 8 years old, and I was 15, 16. And seeing this 8-year-old just completely destroy me on the cello, I realized, maybe this is not for me. It kind of was a bit of a demoralizing experience because the level was so high so early. So I was a little bit I don't know that I can play cello, but maybe bass. Bass is luckily I didn't know those amazing classical bass players like Gary Carr or that can really play all the way up and down the bass. Anyway, I did get some classical training that helped me get intonation on the upright and get acquainted with the orchestral repertoire as well, which I still love. I play along to recordings. I feel like that's a really important thing for my own learning and for anyone, I think.
Sure.
To play with recordings is so good, but I take the score or the bass part for a Mahler symphony, and then I play along. I play along the part. Sometimes you need to tune it up because they tune these orchestras at A445 or something like that, or the recording gets the pitch up, and so I'm trying to match the pitch there. Anyway, but I really like playing along to orchestral parts. Mm-hmm. It's difficult because you're not looking at the conductor; you're just following kind of the pulse of it. But yes, that's kind of a remnant of my classical training.
Wow! And El Suelo Mío is a true solo bass album. And when we say solo bass, so many times somebody will say, okay, here's a solo bass thing, and they've done looping, or they had a drummer, or they used the sound box as their percussive thing and got a layer of thumps going, or something like this. But this is 100% unadulterated, upright bass. And part of the message that I'm getting is, and in your journey there is Peru, there is the classical portion, there is the jazz portion, and all of these are being on display. And whether it is with plucking technique or a bow, I mean, there's all kinds of varieties, but it is all the bass. Tell us about this album.
Absolutely. Well, one of the biggest challenges I've always had with the bass by itself was that I wasn't able to create momentum. And I thought momentum was what allowed a song to progress in time. When you play say like a walking bass line, then you have this rhythmic momentum, harmonic momentum, some sort of a melodic path. But as we all know, walking bass line is only one aspect of music. So to focus yourself in one aspect of music just for the duration of a song, for me, would let out a pretty boring result. You know, as compelling as a walking bass line may be, like maybe you can do a minute of that before we're like, okay, now what? You know. So this is the kind of momentum that I'm talking about. I've always struggled with making things happen by themselves on the bass and to create like a compelling statement from beginning to end. So I looked at all the things that I like that have momentum. For example, like speed. I've worked a lot on getting my, say, like bebop language up to speed, literally, you know, to a speed where I feel like it's kind of cascading in a way, you know. So that was one aspect that I needed for this album. The other was polyphony. Polyphony also creates momentum. When you play like double stops or triple stops, and that creates a sound that, as we all know, on the bass can be like a pretty almost dissonant sounding bass if you play like more than one bass note at the same time. You know? But I strived for the more harmonious, sympathetic sounds that I could find, and then from then on, like start creating something a little more obtuse, something a little more abstract. One thing that I used a lot in this album was a low pedal, like an open E, but with the bass that I use, I have what we call a C extension, which extends the range of the bass on the low string up to a low C. And you can stop the string at the very bottom, which is the C, or you can stop it at C sharp, D, D sharp, and finally E. So one of my favorite sounds on solo bass playing was produced many years ago by Charlie Hayden. I don't know if he was the first one to do it, but he, on many recordings, detuned his low E to a low D. And so you have a tuning that's this drop D that's famous on guitar that, you know, like you can strum chords and you have this really open sounding instrument. And so I applied this Charlie Hayden way of doing things where you get like, you know, you get your G, you get D, A, and another D, right? So strumming actually sounded very compelling. You have one note, you know, you step on the A on the G string, and then you strum the other strings, and you get a sound that's harmonious, you know, like it's not as convoluted as it could sound on a bass, you know. Sure. Maybe I'm also used to it. Yeah. Used to the fact that I've been strumming on bass for a while. But still to say, like, it was, for me, something important, something that I felt like could be captured. And so watching Charlie Hayden create harmonies based on this, like, low D pedal was extremely inspiring. So I try to apply that also on the album, that you can move harmony that has its own progression. Like, you can find a harmonic progression in the key of D that goes to a G chord, goes to an A chord, goes to a B minor, all while playing a low D. And it's not going to, in my opinion and experience, it's not going to sound bad. So I use those as building blocks. This is like this. The foundation is this low D pedal. And then I create melodies and chords on the top to create momentum. Not necessarily with rhythm or speed, just with harmony. Just let the instrument ring. So those were the main foundations for the creation of this album.
Gotcha.
So momentum on speed, momentum on polyphony and harmony, expansion of harmony.
And it's interesting when you mention the momentum, because part of the bass, the job that we always have is as a percussive instrument and as a melodic instrument. And when in conjunction with a drum kit, you can feed off, you can probably stray more into the melodic end because your drummer is carrying that percussive end of it. But in absence of a percussionist, you have the task of both keeping up your own tempo, which I could only imagine whether you had a flashing light or you have a really good built-in metronome, something that just kept you going. But it also, you left yourself space so that you could kind of flex with some of the timing. So it's not like a machine that would just crank out these many notes in this amount of time. There is those creative, either slowing down or speeding up, or it's all not in the same thing. So it's quite remarkable. And I think for people that have never heard an upright all by itself, they might kind of go, oh my gosh, I never realized there was so much potential there.
It's interesting. That's exactly what I hope to bring with this album, because the bass has always been the butt of the joke, and will still be that, and that's fine, But I really see potential on the bass as all the things you said, a melodic instrument, a rhythmic instrument by itself. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be relegated as a background instrument. When you were talking about playing under a drummer, when I play by myself and I play imagining that there's no drummer, mm-hmm. under me, then I really feel like when I stop, it creates such an effect of like, well, song's over until I play again, So part of this process has been also to not be as afraid of stopping, mm-hmm. Stopping, you can stop certain things like speed, but then let something ring and that'll keep the momentum. The ring will keep the momentum. Silence is the only thing that I feel stops momentum. But if you let something be there, then it's still going to keep it. And that's still a lesson I'm learning. About momentum, on these pieces that I recorded on the album, I very purposely try to let go of what I think is being correct in time. Mm-hmm. Like, I try not to be militant about playing in rhythm, because in a way that makes it more constraining for me.
Yes.
So, if the time is good, then great, because all the years of practice have, yielded a fruit. But if it's not, that's still good for me, because I'm not beheld to the click, mm-hmm. So that was an important part for me.
Gotcha. Well, and as we're talking about sound, we should go into a little detail about your gear and how you recorded, how you set this up. Tell us the details. How are you getting your sound?
For sure. So the main sound production comes from this old German-made British bass called Hawks and Sons. It's a company that existed a while ago. And they made sort of commercial high-end basses at the turn of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. Now, this bass is from 1905, and it has huge shoulders. It's a bit of a beast to carry around. It's a little bit problematic. I mean, I've had my fair share of neck problems. Actually, even 6 months ago, I got a pinched nerve from all the playing. And this bass definitely doesn't help. But it has such an amazing sound. I was searching for this bass for 2.5 years. Searching for a bass, and I found this one, and I was like, oh, this is it. Mm-hmm. I saw it, and it's like a classic finding your instrument story, where I was at a shop looking at different basses. I had gone to see a different bass, and then I look at a corner, literally a corner, a bass with like covered in dust. I'm like, what's that? But as I was looking at this bass, it can't be like, it can't be that cliche, you know? And sure thing, I picked it up and oh snap, that's it. I was wondering if the shop actually purposely like dumps dust into this bass so people can see it, you know? You're like, oh, what's that? You know. Anyway, I got it that day for a show that I was doing in London. Then, and I played the show. It was hard. The bass was super hard to play, but it had such a sound. I was like, yeah, you gotta get it. So a few months later, I managed to get it shipped to the U.S. So this is my main instrument, and it has, as I told you, this C extension that makes the bass go lower. And it's a bass that, because of its size and its setup, can take lower notes. You know, the lower notes still resonate acoustically really well. And that was a really important, you know, a bit of a leap to faith when I did the operation to install this, because you're never sure whether it's going to work or not. And I was so glad that it worked. So starts with this instrument, Hawks from 1905. I put spiral core Vike string, Tomastic spiral core Vike from the famed string maker Tomastic Infeld. They make pretty great electric bass strings as well. I have some of their flat wounds in my P-bass copy. But their upright strings are famously, for at least for the last 30 years, to be the loudest, clearest acoustic string. They have many problems. You know, the G is a little bit like, you know, nasally. You know, there's a little bit of problems that can be solved by setup adjustment. You know, which I've done, and you know, I'm really happy. I've been already almost 10 years playing the same brand
Nice.
For both basses. So I have a pickup in this bass. I have two pickups actually. I have a Fishman Full Circle. And a David Gage Realist Lifeline. This Gage Realist Lifeline is a great pickup for traveling because you can hook it up under the foot of a bridge. The installation is really it's pretty simple. So whenever I traveled without my bass, I used to travel much more without my bass, and I would take this pickup and I would install it on other basses. It's a little tricky, but it's easy, you know, and it's non-invasive. After that, I go into a box from the brand from Colorado, Grace Designs, and it's a box named Felix. It's a preamp blender. I have a mic signal that I clip into or I hook into the bridge with rubber bands. And the mic that I use is a pretty high-end recording mic called Sheps MK41. That goes into the mic channel of the Felix. The pickup goes into the pickup channel of the Felix. And then I send those to the, you know, when I'm in a live setting, I send it to the PA, or I send those both to the board.
Yeah.
Now, that's the stuff that comes literally from the instrument. For this recording, aside from those two signals, which in the end, in the final mix, I ended up not needing the pickup. So the mics basically took care of everything. I used a little bit of this Sheps mic, and I had quite a separate setup. I wish I could show you a photo of it. So I had a copy of a Neumann U87 about a foot away from the bridge. I had a ribbon mic, the name of which I cannot remember, but the sound engineer had a plastic bag on top of the mic because the mechanism is so sensitive that a bass would basically like destroy it. Yeah. So in order to capture a bass, you need to put a bag on this mic.
You need to protect it.
Fidelity is it's so sensitive that you can damage it. Then I had a condenser mic like about here just to pick up the string sounds, the finger sounds from the left hand, which, you know, there's not a lot of, but like it was good to pick those up. And finally, I had two room mics. Those were AKGs, I believe, you know, and they were far away and they were stereo. And so that's the mix that I use for recording. And I recorded in a fairly mid-sized room. Sometimes the room is everything, especially for solo bass. You want to, record in a room that responds, that's big enough to like give you good reverb, but also that it's not like lost all the way into the back of the room. So if the room is too reverberant, then you could lose some of the original signal. Because it gets all gets out of whack depending on the response. Anyway, I recorded in a room that had no reverb. The reverb was added basically digitally.
Yeah.
But the engineer that I work with, this guy by the name of Mark Goodell, is a live engineer with whom I've been working for the last 2-3 years. And he truly understands the sound that I'm going for. He's conveyed it live many times. He's recorded me live, right? Yeah, many times. Well, and I gave him a bunch of recordings, solo bass recordings, not solo bass recordings. And they were all over the map. Some Charlie Hayden, some Dave Holland, some Patty Tucci, And I told him, listen, I know that these are different, but there's something pretty great about all of them. I want you to understand why these are great. And then, like, when we're going to record, just, try to see if you can recreate some of that.
Yeah.
And he got it.
Nice.
He understood. That's the second, I was in his room, recording, and then I go listen. I was like, whoa, this is it. Yeah, keep going, Yeah,
that is so great, because so many times, I think I tend to maybe unfairly blame the sound engineers for the loss of sound, because you know what people sound like, and then you hear a recording, you're going, oh, what happened? Why did he turn him down? Or, and granted, when you've got other instruments, I know that, especially when you look at rock, as you were mentioning Metallica back in the day,
oh my God,
so much of it is lead singer or lead guitar, and the bass is a subconscious remnant down there, kind of in the back, that is driving it, but nobody's really all that keen on knowing what's happening because they want to pay so much attention to everything else. And I think so many sound engineers do that exact same thing, is they focus on those more tenor sounds, and they worry about, I don't want to have too much bass. And then I was just chatting with Mark Egan, who had mentioned that vinyl is making kind of a comeback, and one of the issues that there is that the bass is you have to be careful how much bass signal you put out there, because it will literally blow the needle off. It'll knock the arm off of the record if there's too much bass there. And so when you've got all you've got is bass, you're kind of going, well, we better not make a record, because this thing's just going to go flying off.
Consider doing vinyl. Unfortunately, the duration that I wanted the album to be was just a little too above. And I just learned the dB output of the vinyl changes depending on how long the record is.
Oh, wow.
Like, if you do side A be like 20 minutes and the side B be like 18, then you're kind of golden. But if you add more on either side than that, then you're like start to toying with the dB. So that way when you render it, you need to render it at a higher dB, so it records like the duration. And then when you play it, like, you kind of need to like calibrate depending on how long the record is.
Gotcha.
Which is trippy, so what you say about like bass breaking the needle makes total sense.
Well, and I know that probably some of our readers that are more focused on recording an upright will go, yeah, this is what I've been wanting to hear about. But we should probably move along. Jorge, we're talking in the middle of the pandemic, and we always like to talk about the future, but it is the one question that so many players, we don't really have an answer. So it's kind of more of a theoretical. What plans would you like to have for the near future or far future? What's in the works?
Well, right now I'm taking it day at a time. I just came back from Nashville to do a recording, which was quite amazing. I had to take all the precautions. Of course, I'm currently quarantining by myself after that trip. But I went to Nashville to record with Julian Lage, my longtime music companion, and we played with amazing drummer Dave King from the Rational Funk video series, which is like just pure art mixed with comedy. So we recorded Trio over there over the course of 4 days, and it's a new album for the label Blue Note Records. Hopefully will be out sometime next year. So that's the best we can hope for the current situation right now, or the best I can hope for. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing to make music in the same room with people, of course, all with everyone with masks, but it's the first time I played trio music that I was, like happy to record and play, and listen to the mixes, and they sound really great. So it's a kind of like a pandemic infused recording.
Gotcha.
So with that band, I was always touring until the pandemic, and now we will see when will be the next time. There's thoughts of November. I don't think they're going to happen at this point. So we're looking into 2021 for sure. Now that's one of the 3 projects that I'm on that I'm happy to be a part of. The next one is also with Julian on guitar, but it's not led by him. It's led by John Zorn. It's his Masada Quartet. It's like the reinvention of his Masada Quartet, this famous rendering of kind of Jewish-infused Ornette Coleman-ish music. And it had an amazing band back in the 90s. Now, like, there's a reinvention that has a amazing drummer Kenny Wallace, and plus Julian, John on saxophone, and myself. And that band is just, a blast. Like, literally, like, it's such an amazing energy and joy, and just, we were able to play a week at the Village Vanguard back in October, and it was just a madhouse. It was so incredible. Of all the places affected by the pandemic, I imagine like the Village Vanguard being like the most difficult for it to get back to normal, because it's such a small space, poorly ventilated, underground. Yeah. So, I mean, they have been doing concerts where like the band goes into the club and stream outside with no audience.
Sure.
That's doable, but with a full audience, and that place is always like packed, sometimes packed to the brim. So I'm really, that's the hardest thing to imagine getting back to, and that's the thing I miss the most. And finally, the 3rd project that I'm working with is with this amazing pianist from Israel named Shai Maestro. And it's a trio project, and we recorded with this amazing young drummer by the name of Free Nehemia. And we did a recording for ECM Records, just famous recording label from the 70s. I was always been a big fan of. Even from from my time in Peru, even before I knew what it was, I was listening to like this old Chick Corea stuff, and it's all on ECM, it's all ECM records. The Light as a Feather, all this stuff, So it's amazing to record for that label, and we got to track the stuff right before they started shutting everything down. So we will see when that starts up again. Although, like this band does its work more in Europe, and I see that there are places where people are playing in Europe. Like my good friend Dan Tepfer, pianist from New York, just left for Italy to perform solo in Florence, I believe. We did, yesterday we did a Facebook Live. He does like a Facebook Live show every Monday, and we did one over a jack trip. Have you heard about this this method of communication? The jack trip is this server that allows you to play with no latency.
Okay.
So he is about a mile away from where I am, and we connect and we can play together in rhythm. Now, granted, he's like a programmer, total computer genius, so he figured it out really well, And so we played a show, like we took requests and everything, able to play, no problem. Yeah. So I'm down for, doing these kinds of things. Of course, I miss playing, and all the projects that I told you about, like I'm really looking forward equally to be playing with the 3 of those projects as soon as possible.
Well, and if people want to know what you're up to, is the best place to look at jorgeroeder.com?
Yes, pretty much. And I have an Instagram account that's basically my main social media account. It's Jorge_Roeder. And that's where I post most of the things that I am up to, or every video of what I'm practicing.
Sure.
Every now and then, yeah.
We appreciate you taking time to chat from your quarantine location and very excited about El Suelo Mío and these other projects that you've talked about. Folks, you've seen him here coming to you on Bass Musician Magazine, Jorge Roeder.
Thank you.